Good evening, everybody. Welcome once again to the closing panel of this year's Culture Summit Abu Dhabi 2022. We're talking, of course, this year about how one creates a living culture. I'm very pleased to introduce our panelists, if they'd like to walk this way. His Excellency Mohammed Al Mubarak, of course, the chairman of DCT Abu Dhabi, is joining us. Harvey Mason Jr., CEO of the Recording Academy. Ernesto Ramirez is the Assistant Director General for Culture at UNESCO. Fiammetta Rocco is the Senior Culture Editor at The Economist. Tim Marlowe, of course, as you very well know, joining us as well on this stage, and I get to ask the questions this time, the Chief Executive and Director of the Design Museum, and Alexander Monroe, the Senior Curator for Asian Art and Senior Advisor for Global Arts at the Solomon Guggenheim Museum. It's wonderful to have you guys joining us for this last session of the Abu Dhabi Culture Summit. I'd just like to take a few minutes for each of us to walk through some of the takeaways from this year's endeavor, because we've had 3 days of gathering, talking about artists, talking about culture, talking about how to create not just a cultural ecosystem, but also a cultural economy and what that actually means going forward. And obviously, being here in Abu Dhabi, a place that's very close to my heart, where I have lived for over a decade now, and being able to see the strides that this country and this capital city have made towards creating that ecosystem. It's very special to be here. Your Excellency, if you want to just start.
Thank you all. Is this working? Yes. So I think first and foremost, if you all allow me, while everybody is fresh and everybody's awake, just 1 second, I think we should all give a round of applause to the fantastic efforts that the team has worked endlessly in the last several days to make this happen. So to the organizing team, thank you.
Bravo.
And that's my cue to leave.
You're not going anywhere.
Well, I think you know, what's special about the summit, and I was talking to my colleagues, and this is a summit about coming together, and it's an action-based summit, where every single year we come and discuss all aspects of cultural needs around the world. And it's a platform where everybody's voice can be heard, and everybody's issues becomes everybody else's issues, because that is what we are here for. So during the last several days, it's been great, it's been fantastic, because we are reminded on the power of unity and the power of coming together and the power of continuous learning. You know, the pandemic had this summit go virtually, and we lost the human element in it. And it's been amazing, it's been inspiring, it's been educational. I mean, like I said in my opening panel, this is what I believe, this is my university. I've learned so much from the panelists, I've learned so much from people that I haven't met before. I've learned about their culture, they've learned about mine, and it's been beautiful to see. And there's key components that we've heard so many people talk about. I think the aspect of education being a critical part of what we're all trying to do. If we want culture to flourish in the way we perceive it should be flourished, then education has to come hand in hand. And you know, during this summit, our discussions with the Ministry of Education and the Ministry of Education of the UAE, the Ministry of Culture of the UAE, UNESCO, we came up with the concept that we have to all come together to basically address key issues when it comes to culture and cultural education. It cannot just be the ministers of culture, nor can it just be the Minister of Education. It has to be hand in hand. And I think with Ernesto, we have an amazing initiative that we're going to be launching here in Abu Dhabi in 2023, where we're going to be bringing these both worlds together for the first time to set up a brand new framework on how we can monitor and how we can continuously understand the index of how we measure cultural performance in the world.
Ernesto.
You know, when we've been, as UNESCO, we've been, as UN agency, we have been participating in a lot of debate. We are producing a lot of reports. We get together with instruments, convention, recommendation. The three issues that mainly are never present in those meetings are three. One is the format. here it is as important as we are doing right now, not the closure, but meetings like this one, than the workshops, where you meet people and you put together people that normally will never be in the same place. Because we divide in local and national level, because we divide in sectors, because we divide between intersectorial preoccupation in society. Here, at this 5th summit, you find this possibility to get together people that want to share experiences. And it's so important to try to converge between all these reports and talks and conferences and seminars that we have all around the world in a place where intersectorial, intercultural, interdimensions are all together. And I believe that when you mention this conference that we're going to have between education and culture, it will be the most important finalization of what we have been working in the last 20 years. How we ensure that everything that we are talking is put in place at the local level. Because at the end, we are talking about people, we are talking about communities, we are talking about relationships. And that's something, and I will say here, then I will receive all the... We cannot do it digitally. It's impossible. We have to see us face to face, we have to exchange opportunities, and also reflect on what we have learned during these 2 years of pandemic. If we come back as we were talking, working, reflecting before COVID, and we don't take these lessons that we had to learn, not because we wanted, because we were forced, in the culture sector, we're going to lose an opportunity. And today we are in a different world. We have changed. We have to do it, making also to understand that it's another world that we want to live in. And that's what I wanted to share with you today. I'm very thankful and grateful of the 3 days that allow us as UNESCO to be enriched. And that's the most important to share with all of you.
Thank you.
Alexander.
Thank you very much, and I echo Ernesto's enormous gratitude to His Excellency and to the Department of Culture and Tourism and to the team. We just applause for not only for the strategy that those of us who have been involved in the development of Saadiyat, in my case, Guggenheim Abu Dhabi, have witnessed over the years, but for this coalescing that we now feel. You know, it's not a mirage. It really is, after all our journey, an oasis that you have built. And I call it an enormous act of generosity, not only vision, but generosity, and a kind of, we've been talking in our workshops, a kind of rhizomatic generosity, because it's for the people, as you often say, for the people of the Emirates and all the visitors of so many different backgrounds and nationalities who call the Emirates their home, but it's always with a global vision. It's always in this moving, evolving idea and promise of what we can be in this century as global citizens, local and global. So I thank you for that generosity and for what that generosity has taught us and what it allows all of us to come and, as you said, not afraid to be great. So thank you. I spoke to Samaya Valley today, one of my favorite people in the world, and I said, what has this meant for you the last 3 days? And she said, it's a platform to think about the future, to make the future. And I think that's what we have all felt. That's certainly what I have felt. We've spoken about action and about how this closing panel is about action, but in the East, we also value non-action and the position of non-action, which is what I've been thinking a lot about is humility and the power of humility and the productive kind of generation of humility. Last week, we were honored to have with us for meetings the great thinker and really pioneer of global arts museum curatorial work and museum work for Shaka Desai, who is now the advisor of global affairs for Lee Bollinger, the president of Columbia University. And their mandate that she's been helping them with is actually the value of humility in education. And that has got us thinking and got me thinking about humility as a position. And I felt it over and over again in the last 3 days. Without humility, you can't teach. Without humility, you can't learn. Without humility, you can't create, you can't imagine, you can't innovate. You need humility, you need awe. You need to know that you're not alone. You need to know that there's others. We've learned a lot about faith and the humility that our faiths teach us. I want to congratulate you again on the Abrahamic Family House, and to Sir David Ache. I really want to see music in there, sacred music happening there of all eras. And we have humility towards the past. We heard Frank Gehry talk about the past, not just a classical past, but a past of indigenous knowledge systems, of craft, of ways of caring for the earth, of new ways to care for a planet that we can learn from those who came before us, millennia before, right here. And there's also, of course, humility towards the future. I think we were all rather humbled by Ida. Humility towards technology and the worlds of creativity and innovation and knowledge production that technology will create. So my commitment is to the non-action position of humility.
Harvey, your key takeaways.
I'm still processing what my takeaways are, because there's been so much information and there's been so much great conversation. But I will say, actually before I start talking about any takeaways, I have to talk about how grateful I am and how thankful I am to Your Excellence and to your team. We gave them a round of applause, a standing ovation. It's been a great experience for myself, for the entire team. I think everybody here can say what a special opportunity it's been to be here and to share and to collaborate and talk. And to me, the takeaway, as I'm thinking more about it in real time, the takeaway is it's really about collaboration. It's really about coming together. I think we're all going in round robin form here, because when you're saying something, I'm saying, yeah, that's great. And when you're saying something, I'm saying, I love that. And so I think collaboration is going to change the future. Mm-hmm. And I think the opportunity to make and develop the future started here. I think some of the conversations we had here are what's going to form the future. I think from my lens, I see things through a musical lens. It's where I'm from. That's how I operate. I think the idea of potentially being able to build a creative economy, or a bigger creative economy in this region, starts with ensuring that it's a multi-tiered approach. Again, more collaboration. As His Excellency said, it's not just the Department of Culture, but it's education, it's legislation, it's the building of the infrastructure and the commitment to the infrastructure. It's not just about the artists. We've got incredible talent here. It's about giving them the opportunity and really making a decided commitment to building that ecosystem and building that infrastructure. But I have to say, I'm optimistic. I love what's happening here. You don't see this kind of conversation happening every day. You don't see these kind of people coming together to share ideas and to share the expertise. So I'm very excited. I'm very honored. I'm very thankful to be here to represent music and to represent the Recording Academy and have these types of meaningful conversations that can make a difference. This is important work that we're doing. Art, music, culture, coming together to make a difference. And this is what's happening here. So my key takeaway is building the future, collaboration, and the importance of a creative economy.
Tim, you've been leading some of these conversations over the last several days. What's your takeaway?
I'm an optimist, but I love the fact that my optimism is now redefined by Trevor Noah, which is setting an alarm clock at night and waking up in the morning. It doesn't always feel optimistic, does it, when that alarm clock goes on, but it does during the Culture Summit. I remember a year ago when we did a wrap-up, and I remember sitting in my museum in London alone, in a vast space, alone, and wishing I could be with you all, but also loving the fact that we could still go on, that there was resilience and possibility through digital. So I take your point. I can't express eloquently enough how good it is to have our institutions open, to be able to commune in the streets, to be able to travel, and to be able to come together in a culture summit. And this is what generates the energy, this is what generates the momentum. But it is good to know that in a hybrid model, 4,000 or 5,000 people will be looking and logging onto this as well. And I totally get your point. Culture's future is not digital, but digital will play a big role in the way we can manifest and express that. And I think the takeaways for me actually are still, I mean, absolutely processing, but the opportunity for us to hear and for talent to be showcased, extraordinary creative talent from around the world, is a privilege and has been an absolute joy. I mean, the musicians, the artists, and the architects. I found it really heartening, and there is definitely a sea change afoot. I don't mean it's happened now, but it's been happening for the last 10, 15 years, but it's starting to crystallize that what we've been talking about as a summit, about the tensions between and the need for top-down government policy, institutional leadership, and so on, and bottom-up, what happens in communities, what individuals do, how creativity feeds not a homogenous globalized culture, but individuals help make spaces, make communities, and so on. And I see, I mean, this isn't privileging one art form over another, but you know, from the quality and range, Frank Gehry's living buildings that you spoke about so beautifully with him, even though, you know, I mean, Frank's not old school, he's perpetually young at 93, but that's one model. Then there's David Adjaye's model of synthesis and hybridity in the most complex part of humanity, religion, and the emphasis of 3 different religions in something bound together, together apart together, is really profound. And then Samaya and the panel we've just heard, looking at how community architecture, or architecture can be an expression of community and can evolve from individual communities. It's not tokenism, it's not trying to pay lip service to something, it's genuinely being able to research, articulate, listen, and produce something slightly different, and produce something more meaningful. And I mean, maybe that model works in all sorts of different areas of different cultures, but in architecture and the built environment, and that idea of, you know, 3 young women who've just left the platform who can build the future of us, brilliant, get on with it. I find that really heartening. So in particular, we talk about building the future. We mean it metaphorically and with that, but literally we can build the future as well, and that's strongly coming out of this summit.
Fionnetta, if I may, just to slightly guide you on the next question, and I would love to hear your takeaway, but backstage we were having this conversation about when we leave this space, this cocoon, if you will, where we can share ideas and we feel safe, frankly, to do so in our creativity. We're going into a world at war. We're going into a world facing recession, facing a lot of fear about the future. When you think about what you take away from the last 3 days, what is the most important to you?
I think 2 things. One is a phone call that I had from my daughter before I came on stage, who said, "Mum, don't forget, the eyes of our generation are upon you." So there's the first big challenge. But for me, I think about, I give thanks for this extraordinary openness that we've had here, for the ability to be able to cross borders, to meet people I would never meet, to have conversations that I would never have, to talk about things that I didn't even know existed. And then I go away and I think, what about the voices that are fading away? And when you talk about that world, those are the voices that I'm concerned about.
Russia, China, and elsewhere.
Absolutely. People who work in languages that are dying, people who work in languages that are not translated, Chinese visitors whom we're not meeting anymore because it's hard for them to travel because of their pandemic lockdown. It's hard for us to visit them. Russians, a Russian culture which we're so close to, has formed us. We have read Russians in translation. We've listened to Russian music. We've watched Russian theater. We risk a generation of people for whom Russian is going to maybe fade away. I'm worried about that.
Yeah.
I think we will be impoverished. if that's what happens. And the lesson that we've had here, the gift you've given us, has been a gift of richness, polyphony, light. It's been amazing.
Harvey, one of the things you and I were discussing a bit off camera a few moments ago was about the extraordinary power of music to connect people through art, through artists, through feeling, through emotion. But when you think about this with regards to, we talked a bit about streaming services. It's a way to break boundaries, if you will, cross-cultural divides and, frankly, cross borders. Walk me through how you see music, not just in terms of creating a cultural ecosystem, but also connecting all of us at a time when, frankly, my news channel was talking about the possibility of, what was it, a triple-demic in the United States, and God forbid, another lockdown globally.
Well, I think you've seen the importance and the value of music during the pandemic. It was obviously very unfortunate and hard on everyone, but I think music and other forms of art helped get us through it. And that's what I talk a lot about music is, I said in one of my earlier speeches that it's a miracle of music. It does something that nothing else can do. And I think during the pandemic you saw that. You saw people turning to music, you saw people singing, you saw people appreciating it because of what it does in here. I think going forward, there are things that we need to do to make sure that we can support music people. But I also think, to your point, streaming and the evolution of technology is allowing people to express themselves through music much more now than ever. There was a lot of downside, there's a lot of negativity about the pandemic, but the thing that did happen that was exciting, there was an explosion of creativity. And there was more music created, more art, and more culturally relevant things created during the pandemic. So we saw the power of music, and you also saw how music can be created during those times. With regards to streaming, it's totally changed everything about how music is created and consumed. The speed at which it's made, the speed at which it's distributed, the consumption's through the roof. Never been more music consumed, and I think that's going to continue. It shows that you can create from anywhere. We're going to have global superstars.
Infinite possibility.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're going to see global superstars coming out of this region. I'm absolutely positive of it. And that's attributed to the fact that everybody can put out their music. There's 100,000 songs a day being released right now. 100,000 songs a day. So to your question about being able to come from anywhere and break down borders, I think you're seeing that now, and I think you're going to see it going forward. I can't even imagine what the next pandemic could do or what the effect could be. We talked backstage about another round of issues and how do we protect artists and art from that. I don't have the answer, but I do know that artists and people who make art are resilient, they're persistent, they're passionate, and I think those are some things that will help serve us well if we were to go into another pandemic or global crisis.
Yeah. Ernesto, I just want to bring you in on that because we were talking about the value of artists and ensuring during whatever comes that the artists are able to thrive and in a safe ecosystem. But you talked a lot about, over the last 3 days, climate change and UNESCO's role there.
Yes, when you see the Paris Agreement and when you see everything that is happening around climate change, we believe that today, before the war, before the pandemic, we are confronted to one of the biggest challenges that we have is how we ensure that the diversity of cultural expression not only lives are maintained around the world. It makes a better world to exchange between cultures. It has been through all the history. And today we are confronted with some position of some nationalists, populists, that doesn't allow to understand the value of these exchanges. And climate change is affecting many countries that could disappear in 10 years. So all the discussion on mitigation, resilience, is so quite important because when you see, for example, and you mentioned, indigenous knowledge that has been in our communities for so many time, and we have not been able to use it because we believe that science will completely change the face of the world. No, we have to take all these precious indigenous knowledge and to put it in place so that new generation can reimagine the world in which we are living today. And I truly believe when I hear you, music and cultural expression are the most wonderful gift that we can give to new generation, because at the end it's the only way that we can communicate with one another without knowing what it means, but it's the expression of what you truly have inside of you that you want to give to another person. And in all the culture here also, when you are sharing a table with a food that comes from your region, you are sharing a little bit of your identity.
And
it's
your
the
soul.
way,
Your soul.
yes, it's the way that we are communicating. And we should respect this. We should share it between us. And at the end, what is the most important is to learn from bottom up. And I'm completely agree with you. We have to change in the way that we are thinking in silos, from those who take the decisions and those who are somehow living it. And today, when you take the title that you were able to put on the forefront of our discussion, is the most important. Living is always going to the future. But without taking the past into consideration, without learning from what we have lived in the past, we will not be able to see a bright future. And I believe that culture should be at the front of our discussions. And if we have something to give, is to bring others to the table. Because between us, we are all agreeing. But we have to go to the financial market and to ensure that they understand that without artists, during pandemic, we have all decided to jump from our balcony or from our windows, because it's a world in which we don't want to live. And it's the world that we want to share with our future.
It's really interesting. Phil Manning, who's a very distinguished scientist, a natural history professor. He gave a talk earlier today, and at the end of it, he said, it was quite touching responsibility. I didn't agree with him, actually, but he said, I think in the end, we scientists have failed. We haven't been able to communicate. It's a failure of communication about the problems that the planet's faced. We've failed over the last 10 years. Well, there may have been a failure in communication, but actually I think scientists have been pretty impeccable on that. Maybe they've had to give too much of a kind of balance in their research that not everyone's understood. But just as you were talking, I was thinking that culture and the culture, that could be our responsibility, actually, to make the world better for other people. We have a responsibility to communicate through culture. But as you've just said, in the context of the pandemic, one of the reasons why we're so worried about climate change is, because we want to live. And why do we want to live? We want to live because of our cultural lives that enrich us, that make us better, make us human, make us understand where we are in the grand scheme of things, rather than the nebulous chasing of wealth or whatever it may be, which in turn can enhance your cultural life. But it's quite an interesting dynamic that's going on, because there is a younger generation that keeps popping up, or younger generations keep popping up in the conversations of this summit, who seem to get that. And we need to make sure that kind of doesn't get knocked out of them in a kind of cynical understanding that it's all pointless in the end, because we're going to have 8 pandemics and the world's going to go under anyway, so let's just let rampant capitalism take over and it doesn't matter because we're all doomed. Okay, that's a slightly simplistic analysis of it all. But I do think there's something in culture's role in nuance and complexity, he says after a completely unnuanced and uncomplicated rant. But I do think, and that was the other point that others have made, Trevor Noah included, that complexity and nuance is something that culture does well, and the world of politics and a lot of the way that we in the media or our fellow people in the media polarize. And we need to move away from simple binary choices or choices.
Absolutely. And like as we often say on CNBC, you can't legislate growth. You cannot legislate, in that sense, culture.
And I think the media has a huge role in this, starting by looking at itself. Chasing the noise, chasing the buzz means that it's sort of turned away from nuance, it's turned away from things that maybe not so loud, it's turned away from the voices that are becoming quiet. It must not be complicit in that.
Yeah. Alexandra, you mentioned humility. when I look around the world today, and I'm assuming everyone probably agrees with me, I'll go out on a limb, when we look at what's happening in the political discourse, humility, unfortunately, is not necessarily part of that conversation. When you think about what's necessary for what we've been talking about in terms of a cultural ecosystem, obviously you got to find a way to fund it. But in terms of what it ought to look like from the top down, what is the role of artists in this?
Well, as you're all talking, I have the names of all these artists in my head that can illustrate every point each one of you are taking. And I can say with pride that the Guggenheim Abu Dhabi, now under the direction of Stephanie Rosenthal and Mesa Al-Qasimi, has collected all of them and is committed to really make the documentation and expression and witnessing of climate change and also of indigenous knowledge systems and other kinds of philosophies from other eras and other cultures and other heritages available and evident to enhance and enrich the intelligence with which museum goers, be they children or be they seasoned museum goers or whether they're someone just visiting Abu Dhabi for the first day, can learn something and can change their perspective on the world and understand different registers of urgency. You know, there's art that is beautiful, that's art that's contemplative, there's art that's spiritual, there's art that is entertainment, and we have all of it, and every museum should have all those registers, just like, you know, a great music, a great song goes across different registers of emotion and documentation also, right? And I feel that artists can do that. So I'm thinking, for example, of a work that's now on in London, which I urge all of you to see at 180 Strand, of Richard Moss, an Irish artist who has spent, you know, close to 10 years documenting the destruction of the Amazon rainforest, really by local pirates. Like literally, it's pirating. It's local workers who want a buck, but they are selling up the chain to multinationals. And it is I mean, we were in tears for an hour and a half. Also music, it's, you know, the sound is by Ben Frost, who works with Brian Eno, so there's a huge musical component to it. Artists are witnesses, and artists can also show us the way out of it and show us the way to cope with it, and maybe the way to decide how to act and go forward.
Yeah, Your Excellency. When you think about what happens next, we just have a few moments more with you, but what Abu Dhabi has managed to achieve, even in just the last decade, has been monumental. And I think that this summit and this gathering of folks here is a testament to what you've been able to achieve. I follow financial markets and geopolitics as well as culture. And there is no doubt in my mind that the center of gravity, as we've been discussing, has shifted in many ways to this part of the world. What is your commitment as Abu Dhabi, as the UAE, going forward to creating the kind of ecosystem that we've been talking about over the last 3 days?
Thank you. You know, we have been, as Emiratis, extremely blessed. The leadership here from day one has always emphasized the importance of culture. For a culture that we all know is here to give us hope. So we talked about optimism. This is what culture is all about. Whether you're seeing a performance, listening to music, looking at a painting, and the list goes on. Learning about somebody else's culture, learning about somebody else's heritage. This is what optimism is all about. This is hope. From day one, this was the case for us. It was understanding our own culture, our own heritage, but opening our doors to global culture and global heritage. And coming together in doing that was not just a strategy, it was a way of life. And that was instilled by the father of the nation, the late Sheikh Zayed, instilled by Sheikh Khalifa, the late Sheikh Khalifa, and instilled by Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed, the current president of the United Arab Emirates. We have to believe that everything that we are all doing is done for a greater tomorrow. We shouldn't basically just focus on the negatives. Let's really focus on the positives and focus on the solutions to get to the positives. So us coming together here, talking about how we can make a difference is what it's all about. You know, I can basically go on a long list of initiatives that just has come out of these 3 days. And it's just going to take another couple of hours. Because the fact of the matter is, this is what the summit's all about. It's connecting. You know, I remember summit number 1, I met an individual. I don't know if he's here. Takashi? Are you here? Yeah. So Takashi is from Japan. And we met here in year 1 of the summit. And I wanted to learn more about his culture, and he wanted to learn about mine. And that was the first step. It's just us sitting and talking to each other and opening our minds to understand each other a little bit more. Then that moved to, okay, what are we going to do next to each other? How are we going to transfer that knowledge that we both gained back to Japan and back to the United Arab Emirates? And today, we're building phenomena here in Abu Dhabi. And at the same time, there's several programs, cultural programs happening in Tokyo and all over Japan. This is the power of the summit. More importantly, we talked about the human aspects of the summit. Today, Takashi is not a friend. He's a brother. And this is something that the summit gave me. So more than anything, I just hope that when we walk out these doors, we walk out knowing that we're a part of one big global family. And we're going to have to do things together, and we're going to have to move forward together. So thank you.